Good morning. Good morning. Good morning. Hey, everybody. My name is Debbie. Welcome to my channel. We are on what part are we on? I forgot. Judy, what part are we on? 67? Is it day 67 for us? Whoa, we've been doing this a long time. Okay, Judy, you put I'm assuming his is Phil Spector. As a defendant, it's early, y'all. I've only had one cup of coffee. As a defendant, his eccentricity took center stage. He would arrive in court for pretrial hearings in theatrical outfits, usually featuring high-heeled boots, frock coats, and wildly styled wigs. He arrived at one hearing in a chauffeur-driven stretch Hummer. Man. Jeez. I don't understand people like that. They just want to be the center of attention. They have, what's it called? Main character syndrome. Just look at me, look at me, look at me. Yay, Nancy's green. Yay. How did you get green after the stream? Was it like delayed from somebody who gifted memberships yesterday? That's weird. Hey, Terry. Okay, the reason for. Hey, Jill. The reason for the test messages, YouTube has this new thing where it puts a little purple crown next to your name. It has a leaderboard. And basically, like, whoever's commenting the most, you get points, and then you get a crown, and it's numbered 1, 2, 3, and then you can knock somebody out of first place if you comment more or send more super chats or whatever. I turned that off because with the ADHD, it is going to annoy the crap out of me. And the channel that I just came from had it turned on, and they were like, haha, I'm back in first. And, they're trying to knock each other out of first place. And it's extremely distracting. And what do you mean your time has finally come? I turned it off. Yeah. And then Jill gifted 5, and it didn't show that it gave it to anybody, which it was weird. I was telling Travis that last night. I'm like, I don't know if people got those or they're going to get their money refunded or what, because it didn't say. There's like 15 people that got gifted memberships, and it didn't even say who it was. So I turned them off for the simple reason that I don't want my chat worried about who's in first place. It's going to distract. It's still showing the crowns? No, it's not. I thought I had it turned off. I don't see them. Oh. Maybe I just turned it off from me then. Okay. Okay, maybe I just turned it off for me. Okay, cool. Oh. So you guys are still going to be competing in the chat. It's just not going to distract me. Okay. So you guys are going to distract me. I just won't see the crowns. All right. Okay. I guess that's fine. They're distracting. You know, like any little thing is like squirrel, which I never understood before. Um, like the things like Emily D. Baker was like, oh, don't use all caps and don't do this or don't do that because it distracts me because of the ADHD. And I never understood that. I never got that until it started doing the same thing to me when people like I would notice it in other because she was the first person I ever watched like live and I didn't get it. And then I started watching other live streamers and I was like, "Oh, okay, I understand it now. I get it." Like I get it. It pulls your eyes away and it like draws you away from what you're supposed to be focusing on. I get it now. And at that time I didn't know I had ADHD. I've learned from watching LawTube because a bunch of these lawyers have ADHD. This is how I've discovered that I have ADHD by watching Runkle and EDB and Alita and yeah, I'm not competitive at all. Not at all. Now, Travis, oh my gosh. We can't even play Uno without him and Casey are just Kristen, like, she plays for fun. Like, she likes it when she wins, but she plays for fun. Casey and Travis, oh my God. Oh my God. Oh my God. Casey will make up her own rules to win, which I keep telling her is cheating. No, it's not. That's the rule. Yeah, that you just made up. Okay, so we ended around the 30-minute mark. So it looks like we have about an hour and 20 minutes. Today is going to be a half day with the Karen Reed trial, and we have to catch up on the little bit that we missed yesterday. And some of you may have already watched it. I watched bits and pieces because I was at the doctor's office, of course, so I kept getting interrupted. I watched as much as I could. But we're going to watch all that together. And we're probably going to be a little late getting over there. I set it to start at 9:10, I think, but we might be a little bit later than that. But that's okay because it's a half day and we're not going to miss anything. So it's all good. Oh, I need to share my screen. Dang, I've gotten better about that. I haven't forgot to share my screen in a long time. Dang, I wish I could remember. Is it Colonel Sanders he looks like? Is that it?
What I was attempting to demonstrate was not the same as a discharge of a firearm.
Okay.
But looking strictly at particle size under a certain amount of initial velocity that is created by the pressure in the paint can. And these particulates would travel on a horizontal far. And you can see a trail of them all the way out to about 63 inches.
Okay.
When you add more energy by placing a fan next to the can, you're allowing these particulates to travel farther.
Okay.
And as you get down into small particulates, the effect on gravity becomes an issue in health safety concerns when you're dealing with particulates that are less than 1/10 of a millimeter in size. The effect by gravity becomes less, hence you have airborne contaminants and that sort of thing. So when you get down to these small sizes, you're not dealing with the size of the stain. You're dealing with the size of the sphere that's actually going through the air. And I often use the analogy when you're making pancakes in the morning, the size of the ladle versus the size of the pancake you pour on the grill. The actual sphere that's traveling through the air that creates a stain that's 1/10 of a millimeter in diameter might be actually quite a bit smaller. And while it's in the air and in the atmosphere, then it is susceptible to air movement.
So a stain that was on a garment that ended up being measured on the garment at 1 millimeter, for instance, would be significantly smaller than that as an orb or a sphere traveling through the air, because that's a terrific example. It's visual, and we've talked about that. That's what I like. When you ladle that pancake batter out onto the pan, it spreads out. If you measure the outside diameter of that pancake, it's going to be significantly larger than the ball, if you will, of pancake batter.
I need to qualify this,
Sure.
that a griddle is a non-absorbent surface, that the stain diameter will have some relationship to the absorbency of the material of which it lands upon.
Okay, assume for my question.
But it should be smaller.
Assume for my question that the sphere of blood lands on a surface, a relatively, a surface that has a capillary effect. In other words, the weave of the fabric creates a surface that each weave is about a millimeter in diameter or in width.
That's right. Okay.
So if that in fact is the measurement on the garment, you can safely say that the item traveling through the air was smaller than that.
Yes.
Okay. When you talk about I want to make sure I'm very clear about this. I think you just indicated this to the jurors. When you talk about the paint can and the fan behind the paint can propelling something 94 inches or 63 inches respectively with and without the fan, you are not approximating as a scientist telling the jury this is what you should expect from an integral gunshot.
I'm not telling you that to expect that these droplets will travel 94 inches. No.
Okay, thank you. When you in fact, when you look at something that may have been caught in columnized air, from a fan, for instance, one of the things you want to look at is drying time. I mean, these are tiny little particles of blood, correct?
Yes.
As a matter of fact, I mentioned, you referenced Tom Bevel. Tom Bevel has done experiments throughout the country where he teaches classes, and I'll bet you've taught a few yourself, where you drop blood into a spinning fan and boom, it's projected in that column of air a certain distance, correct?
Yes.
Isn't it true that Mr. Bevel has found that in that experimentation with blood, that those tiny particles, those 1 millimeter and sub-millimeter sized particles, are not found wet any further than about 3 feet?
I don't recall that from his article.
Would you, just from yours?
I have done similar experiments, and small droplets of blood don't have much water within them, therefore they dehydrate rather rapidly.
So if they're traveling, say they're caught in a column of air and they travel, let's say 5 feet or 6 feet or 7 feet even, by the time they get out there, they're going to be dry.
I think that velocity would probably have a factor in this.
Sure.
And drying deals with time. And the distance they travel per unit time would have to do with velocity that they're traveling. And you're getting on the edge of numbers that we can't really measure.
Okay.
In a gunshot circumstance, where you have either forward spatter with the bullet or back spatter coming back, we don't have a mechanism of measuring how fast those droplets are going. It's a science of observation.
If you have blood that's on a garment and it's absorbed into the garment and into the weave, for instance, the capillary effect has taken place, which means that the blood is on the garment and then soaks in and takes the directionality of the weave of the garment, correct?
Yes.
Okay, that is wet blood, correct?
If indeed it's blood, yes, it is wet blood.
For purposes of my question, yes, if it's blood, it's wet blood.
Okay.
Not dried blood, correct?
Yes.
Okay, so once again, if I might use myself, if you have wet blood being absorbed on a particular pattern on a garment, talking about the drying times, that would tend to suggest that the blood was intercepted earlier or closer than, for instance, later in its travel through the air.
Again, the issue of velocity, you're talking time. And I cannot assign a velocity to the speed at which those droplets travel through the air.
Okay. Can you say this? Is it consistent if you find a garment that's got blood stains on it? Is it consistent with the blood still being wet when it's absorbed onto the garment?
Yes.
Okay. And if it's consistent with being wet, is that also consistent with the garment being relatively close to the spattering mechanism?
I don't know how close though.
Right, but you can say it's consistent with it being close.
Yes, I can't assign a distance.
You would not quarrel with an experiment by, well, are you aware that Tom Bevel did an experiment with blood where he laid out a sheet and dropped blood into a fan and basically moved the 1 millimeter sized particles through that column of air to a certain distance out to about 6 feet, and that he found everything beyond 3 feet was basically dried on the paper, and when he picked the paper up, it just fell off.
I haven't seen that, no.
Okay. Would that based on your experience, would that experiment surprise you, or is that consistent with what you understand?
I don't know the velocity at which those droplets are traveling. I'd like to read the paper before I comment.
Sure, okay. One of the things that you said in direct examination, I thought it was just a terrific statement. You said, we're in the business of observations, correct?
That's correct.
You teach your students that.
Yes.
So in other words, you don't conduct any kind of a crime scene investigation in a vacuum. You want to get out there, as I said, you want to get invested in the crime scene. When I say invested, I mean you yourself want to put eyeballs on physical evidence. You want to roll your sleeves up and engage in a crime scene investigation that you're involved with personally. You're making your own observations, not relying on others.
Yes.
As much as possible.
As much, yes.
There is also a mantra, sort of, maybe it's a mantra, maybe it's not, you'll tell me, in your industry that the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, correct?
That's correct.
Explain to the jurors what that means.
Well, let's talk about luminol as an example. You could spray luminol onto a surface and not get a reaction, and that doesn't mean that there isn't blood there. There may be reasons for which you don't see it that are not readily available to you at the time. So the evidence of absence, or the absence of evidence, is not necessarily the evidence of absence.
And that goes to physical items of evidence at the crime scene as well.
Yeah, I guess.
I guess it would go to anything, correct?
Yeah, we're speaking crime scenes. I guess that's,
Okay.
I'm not sure where you're going with this, but
Story of my life.
anxiously awaiting.
All right. Well, to follow up on your luminol example, I'll take a side road and then I'll get back on the main road in a second. To follow up on your luminol example, there are certain scientific endeavors to try and explain the absence of certain evidence. In other words, if you engage in a visual examination, for instance, let's say a visual examination of this surface right next to you. I'm just using that as an example. You look at it under normal light, then you get down real close to it and you look at it and you're looking for blood, for instance. You look at it under the aid of a flashlight. You get right on top of it, you see nothing. There's no indication that there's any red stains there. There's no visual indication that there's anything on that. You then go back and luminol that, and there's no luminescence whatsoever. In that particular scenario, you would probably report that there was no observable blood, correct?
Yes.
All right. There have to be, in other words, there have to be times, you can take the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence to an extreme and say, well, then we can't figure anything out, correct?
Well, I don't think I've ever said that.
Right. There's some common sense that we put into this as well.
Right.
Any crime scene investigation, you bring with you years of experience, correct?
That's right.
All right. With regard to the sleeve and the photograph that you talked to Miss Kinney Bodden about, now I'm back on the main road again. She asked you what you expect to see when you fire a gun and there's back spatter. What do you expect to see on the cuffs? And you said, well, I would expect to see maybe some blood inside the cuff. I'd expect to see some blood maybe on top, depending on the angle of my arm, maybe on the bottom, something like that, correct?
That's close.
And you showed a photograph of
Yes.
An experiment that you did where you actually fired and your lab coat got some blood on it. You weren't firing into an intraoral cavity, correct?
No. The purpose of the photograph was to get the information out there, alert other investigators to look for this sort of thing.
Once again, you're not suggesting to this jury that in an intraoral gunshot wound, particularly, you have to find that blood pattern on the cuffs.
Well, you have to have a caveat that there has to be back spatter that's formed.
And in some cases, there's no back spatter, correct?
In some shooting circumstances, there's no back spatter.
Okay, you kind of have to take each crime scene as it comes to you, correct?
Right.
All right. In this particular case, you're aware that the back spatter was relatively minimal. Is that right?
Photographs that I saw of the garment that she had on had arrows that depicted, I assume, the placement of small droplets of blood.
Okay.
And I didn't count them, but it looked like there was a couple dozen of them.
Okay. And you also saw the jacket, correct?
Yes, and I saw the jacket.
And there were, say, 17 to 20 or so on the jacket.
Yes.
All right. With regard to that mantra that we talked about, the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Did you look at the photographs of the cuff of Mr. Spector's jacket, the white jacket?
I believe I did see some photographs of the cuff, yes.
And any time that you're dealing with a back spattering event, you have to consider the geometry of the gunshot. You have to consider the physical attributes of what's being shot, correct?
Yes.
Your understanding of this intraoral gunshot wound, the gunshot wound in this case, was that the first contact with a bloody surface would have been the back of the throat, correct?
It seemed reasonable, yes.
Okay. The back of the throat is covered by cheeks and lips and teeth, and there's a tongue in there, correct?
Well, your anatomy isn't real good, but I'll just say yes.
How about intermucosa? I've learned a few things in this trial.
I don't think the teeth are in the back of the throat, but go ahead.
I didn't mean it that way. If I said it that way, I apologize. I mean, there are some surrounding anatomy parts, anatomical parts, correct?
Yes.
All right. And that, of course, will impede, just like hair might impede or a garment might impede certain backstab.
Yes.
Okay. Ms. Kinney Bodden asked you if you recognized or were told about or read about an item, a stain on the back of Mr. Spector's jacket that's been testified to as being backspat blood.
Blood. Okay.
Okay. And she held her arm up like I'm holding right now with my right arm bent 90 degrees and my fist sort of by my ear, exposing the bottom of that jacket, bottom of my jacket out in front of me. Correct?
Okay.
You're not saying that that's the only possible way that part of the jacket can be exposed out in front, correct?
What I'm saying is that if that is a direct contact with that jacket, then it has to be within the line of flight of the particulates that exit in a backspatter pattern.
Okay, so for instance, Mr. Dixon, for instance, if I held my arm out in front of me like this, and the spattering event came from about the oral cavity of Mr. Dixon's head or face, and I had my hand out this way, certainly if backspatter came this direction, that could be exposed to the spattering event, correct?
I don't like your example. I would expect it to land on the forward part of the arm unless there's for some reason that the bicep region of the sleeve would be down below to a point that it would get on there.
But you certainly have to agree that the bottom part of the jacket is exposed to the area in front of my arm as I'm holding it right now.
Oh.
If back spatter comes out in a cone, correct?
You want to step down? You look like you want to get over towards me. I assume it's for a good purpose. Did you
A
want?
nonviolent one, yes, Your Honor.
Did you want to step down and show him something?
Yes,
Go ahead.
thank you.
Mr. Jackson, why don't you come over and sit? Okay, hold your arm out. Okay. In a shooting circumstance, and if we're going to assume that that the source, in this case, the mouth of Lana Clarkson, is here in the range of where the gun is, and the spatter is coming out in a direction like this, it isn't going to go around the sleeve and come up. It's going to travel in straight lines. It's going to be on the exposed surfaces of whatever is closest, okay? And within the distance of which it will travel. I'm not certain in an intraoral circumstance how far they will travel, but until they are affected by gravity where they will start to fall.
Right.
Then they're going to impact surfaces directly.
Okay. Now assume, thank you for that explanation. Now assume instead of my arm being direct, go ahead and have a seat, Mr. Spector. I think we can do this this way. Now assume instead of my arm being directly, basically parallel, I don't know what it is. Let me start that over. Instead of my arm being straight out in front of me and like it was during your example, let's say now that the target is substantially beneath me, okay? And I'm over the top of the target, facing down. Now the bottom portion of my jacket is exposed more fully than, for instance, the top portion because the target is beneath my arm and my shoulder.
Right, and your underarm, the closest part of your would also be exposed.
Sure.
But the problem I'm having with dealing with this is I've never looked at the jacket, and where this particular spot is on the jacket, I'd like to know more about that before I provide you with more conclusive statements about in the direction that you're going.
Okay, I understand that, Ms. Specs, and I would have provided you with more pictures if I had an opportunity, but you're not my witness, so I couldn't. I guess generally, you make very, very sage points about that. I guess generally what I'm saying is, in your example, very good point. If blood is coming out in a cone and my hand is straight out in front of me, that's going to be a little different than, for instance, if I drop my hand and the target is beneath me, now the bottom portion of the jacket is more fully exposed to the target area than the top. Generally.
Again, it depends upon if you consider that the exit of these gases is going to cone, the position that her head is in will also be a factor. If she's sitting back and she's looking up, the cone direction is going to still fall parallel to your arm if it's extended like that.
Okay.
These are variables that there are so many variables here regarding the arm that it's, these are extremely general.
Extremely general, but at least for our purposes, you not having any more information than you have, let's just leave it at this. There's a difference between what you explained to the jurors. If I had my arm straight out in front of me and there's a spattering event in front of me, there's a difference between that and if the target is beneath me and I drop my arm to say a 45 degree angle, something like that. There's a difference.
In relation to your arm, there may not be because the cone of force may still be directly back towards your arm. Where the droplets land in relationship to the rest of the jacket probably would have a factor.
All right. And one of the things about that kind of statement, the absent evidence is not evidence of absence, you've actually related that in not those exact terms, in some other terms, you related that in the paper that Ms. Kinney-Bodden asked you about concerning proximity and blood spatter appearing on an item, correct? You've talked about that.
Go ahead and you want to read something.
Sure. You cannot discount the proximity of an item, the proximity of a piece of evidence to a spattering event simply because there is limited spatter on that item, correct? There are too many factors.
That's right. You cannot assign a particular caliber of a weapon.
Right.
Nor can you, as you said, necessarily place it in a certain location unless you can further understand the circumstances.
Right. So in other words, you cannot, based on that principle that you've relayed in that article, you cannot say an item was not in a particular position because it would have had more blood on it. Therefore, definitively, it's not there. You cannot say that, correct?
Yeah, probably so.
I'm sorry, you said?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
You didn't say what he fumbled it.
You indicated something in answer to Miss Kenny Bodden's question about the teeth. You did suggest that in answer to her question that the muzzle flip that you would get from a .38 caliber or Colt Cobra would be consistent with the knocking out of teeth, correct?
Well, I believe what I talked about was secondary recoil.
Right.
And that there's a recoil that's back toward the muzzle.
Right.
I don't believe I ever talked about teeth. Maybe I did.
Okay, and I thought you said that the dental caps, if the recoil of the gun popped backward in the intraoral gunshot wound, that would have been responsible for the caps of the teeth coming off in a particular direction.
I don't recall if I said that. Maybe I did.
Okay, let's move past that question. That was sort of foundational. Your point was that, or Ms. Kenny Bodden actually asked you, would the caps of the teeth be in the direction of the shooter? And you said actually it depends on where the shooter was, correct?
Yes.
The caps of the teeth, if the recoil or the muzzle flip is responsible for knocking out the caps of the caps of the teeth will go in the direction of the muzzle flip, not necessarily in the direction of the shooter, correct?
Yes, one would measure or examine the trajectory of the bullet, and reversal of that trajectory would be in the direction that the weapon would recoil.
Okay, so if the shooter were to my left of center, for instance, and the arm were exposed this way, you wouldn't necessarily expect the teeth to come back toward me. You'd expect the teeth to come out where the muzzle flip is, correct? In that trajectory. Again,
the materials that are going to exit from the mouth are going to probably go more in a cone-shaped pattern. It's certainly possible that they could miss an individual if the weapon is held from the side. That's a possibility.
Okay. Your Honor, may I have just a second?
Yes.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions. Thank you, Mr. Pex. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, redirect. Would it be more comfortable for you to remain seated?
Okay.
Okay,
Probably actually better if I
all right.
walk over.
You have me back again, Mr. Pex.
Yes, how are you?
I'd like to start with some of the last items that you talked about with Mr. Jackson. You said you may not get back spatter. When you looked at the pictures here, did you see back spatter?
Pictures of what?
Of that we were talking about, that we reviewed on Lana Clarkson's slip and all.
I looked at photographs that had arrows on them. I have not looked at them to personally identify them as back spatter.
For the purpose of my questions, assume for the moment they're back spatter.
Okay.
That they
All
came
right.
from where they've been tested and their blood and they belong to her, so we get past the scientific problems.
Okay, we'll make that assumption.
That you're having. Okay. When you have a spattering event and you know there's spatter on someone's clothes is within 2 feet, would you expect there to be a distribution of spatter on clothes and other items nearby?
Yes.
Okay, and if someone is wearing the other items nearby, would you expect to be a distribution of spatter?
If it's within the cone of the spatter that is exiting from the wound.
And when a cone exits from a wound on an intraoral gunshot wound, either as you explained through the nose or the mouth, is it more dense by the cone? Is the spatter more dense by the cone?
Yes.
Okay, and so that if I am, and I will gingerly walk up and assume my place as the bride, Mr. Jackson, taking away your place, okay? If I walk back up to you again, and I'm not standing equally you, but I'm standing over you, and I'm within 2.5 feet like I am now, and we know that there's blood spatter coming out, would you expect to find blood spatter on the nearest item?
Yes.
And the nearest item, if I am a shooter, would be the jacket cuff, correct?
Your side would be the weapon,
Nearest side would be the weapon, and next?
the hands, and the cuffs.
And the cuffs, okay? And would that just exclude the cuffs of a jacket or also include the cuffs of a shirt?
The shirt as well.
Cuffs of a shirt as well? And if a cuff of a shirt extends below the jacket, would you then expect to find blood spatter on the cuff of a shirt?
Yes.
And would the absence of blood spatter in the cuff of a shirt be meaningful you when interpreting a stain? Would the absence of blood spatter on a cuff of a shirt be meaningful you when interpreting a stain?
I would certainly take that into consideration, yes.
Okay, and if you had other items of clothing nearby, such as a shirt that somebody was wearing, and you knew there was blood spatter in the nearby item of a jacket, would the absence of blood spatter on a shirt be important to you?
Yes.
Would the absence of blood spatter on somebody's pants be important to you?
Yes.
Why would the absence of blood spatter on all the other clothes and on the cuff that comes out of the jacket be important to you?
Again, as we've talked about for most of the day, when we talk about back spatter, we talk about particulates that are in motion. And the motion is created by the expansion of gases as a result of a discharge of a firearm. As these gases leave the path of least resistance, which in this particular situation would be the mouth and potentially the nose, then as they leave a small focused area, they will expand in their travels until such time as gravity and air resistance cause them to fall. If you are within that cone and of these particulates, it is reasonable to expect that they would get on objects that are within that region.
Okay, and have you ever seen a case that you looked at from a gunshot wound, whether it be inshore or not, where back spatter could jump around and miss a person's shirt sleeve, if the shirt sleeve is closed, and then just end up on the bottom of a jacket such as here? You ever seen a case like that?
No, and the only explanation would be that perhaps there's some intervening object,
Okay, and
or that particular object is not associated with the shooting.
okay, or the location of the object, such as a shirt, would be that the arm would be up so that the target would be the back of the jacket, correct?
Yes.
Okay, as opposed to down here, where the target would be the cuffs of a jacket.
Right.
Sure.
Again, I'm at a disadvantage in having not looked at this jacket and it's the exact location of this particular droplet
Okay, now,
of interest.
I apologize, I interrupted you. When Mr. Jackson ended, he talked about a muzzle flip, and you talked about secondary recoil. Are you using the same terminology?
The muzzle flip, I think that he is talking about is the result of both primary and secondary recoil.
Okay, and so secondary recoil is the proper term, correct?
Secondary recoil is the result of the gases that emanate from the barrel that are pushing back towards the muzzle.
Okay. And so, again, Mr. Jackson asked you, and he came to you and said, if you're here, and your head is pointing here, move your head a little bit, and I'm a shooter with a gun, would you expect then objects that come out of the mouth to go towards the recoil of the gun?
If the trajectory of the bullet is straight through the mouth to the back of the throat, then the mouth is going to be faced in the direction, a reversal of that trajectory.
Okay, and assume for the moment that there is a straight-on wound in the back of the throat as opposed to me reaching out here. How would you expect the secondary recoil to be?
The recoil would be straight back.
Now, one of the things that you also discussed was the size of back spatter when it goes. And is there something, when backspatter lands on an object, you said that it could expand a little bit, correct?
Yes,
And we all agreed, I think you agreed, Mr. Jackson, that if it's expanding, it has to be wet, correct?
yes,
And when a gun goes off, is there heat that's generated out into the gases?
yes,
And does that heat also start carrying gases forward
yes,
and then backward?
yes,
And so the bullet producing event or the gunshot wound produces a heat producing event, correct?
yes.
And does that heat keep that blood, when you do experiments, moist?
I'm not certain, first of all, how heat plays a role in the drying times of droplets of that size.
Okay.
In a gunshot, you're talking about an explosion. You're talking about sufficient heat to melt the lead on the end of a bullet. And now you have these expanding gases that are hotter than the surrounding environment as they travel back towards the direction from which the bullet came. They are still moist up to a point. And I'm not sure that, I don't know any physics principles to apply because we don't know what those temperatures are.
That's where I'm going with you. So you don't know in terms of an intraoral wound what the temperatures are and how long that blood stays moist and to how far it goes, right?
That's right.
All you know is that when you add momentum to a situation of a blood spattering event, the blood can go further, correct?
Right.
And if the blood is softer or wetter, it can then expand when it hits, correct?
Yes.
And because if the blood is softer and wetter because of the heat, it doesn't have to be drying out 2 feet away, does it?
No.
It could dry 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You just don't know, correct?
I published a paper on blood drying times as one of them that I published, and I've done quite a few studies on this. Again, time is a factor on blood drying time. Diameter of the droplet versus time. Velocity here is an issue that's an unknown. So we don't know how far a droplet could travel per unit time in a given shooting environment.
So would it be wrong to assume then that something that goes out, can only go out 2 feet, would dry within that 2 feet?
I don't know how to assess. We know that we have liquid stains at 2 feet within the experimental design of the paper that I wrote. And these formed circles on cloth. What is the maximum distance before it dries would again come back to the circumstance of time versus velocity.
So any indication or any suggestion that blood on a intersecting item has to be close to the spattering event because it's still wet would be incorrect?
Close is the issue. How close, I don't know.
And so the definition of close could be 6 inches?
I can't assign a value to the term close.
Okay. And when you say you can't assign, therefore it could be out 9, 10, 12 feet. It depends how you define close.
Depends on how you define close.
Okay.
I would not expect to see it out, a 1 millimeter droplet out 9 or 10 feet.
Okay. Unless you have velocity, correct?
Unless you would have some circumstance like that.
Okay. And that's when we go back to the issue of the intraoral wound. This is different than most experiments because there is velocity that is assigned to it,
You
correct?
have a focused force as opposed to most circumstances where force is dissipated in a broad direction.
Thank you. Now, Mr. Jackson asked you about the pictures that you saw about the legs of Lana Clarkson. Did you make any assumption that her legs were when you looked at the pictures, that her legs were in that position at the time that the gun went off?
No.
As a matter of fact, as a person who has examined crime scenes, are you aware of situations where a person's legs go out under them after they even die?
I have read that in pathology textbooks. I don't have any personal experience to relate to that.
So it would be fair to say that as somebody who's lectured and taught blood spatter to other people that come to juries and explain them, it would be improper for the criminalist to assume that a leg position is in that leg position at the time somebody dies.
The issue isn't always, is some type of involuntary movement. There is a greater concern of who's been to the crime scene and how many people have been there before you got there and what did they do prior to your arrival.
And you saw pictures of Ms. Clarkson slipped, actually, and I think you pointed out to me, being pushed up and rumpled up, correct?
Yes.
And did that have significance to you?
It appears that she is slumped in the chair. There's been some movement.
Okay, and that could be a post-gunshot wound position?
I don't know.
You don't know one way or another?
That's correct.
And it would be unfair to you for anyone in your position to assume that that was the position that she was shot in?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, Mr. Jackson also asked you about whether or not when you go to a scene, would you take a banister or a wall or a rug? You've been to crime scenes before, correct?
Yes.
And have you ever supervised the taking out of physical evidence, including something like a banister, a rug, or a wall?
Oh, yeah.
How many times would you say?
If it's important to me at the time and I don't want the evidence to be destroyed and I want to maintain it in a pristine condition, I got no problem. And of course, it has to be approved by the district attorney's office. And they are the ones who eventually, at least by Oregon law, have to pay for the replacement. So we have taken, I can think back in the past, entire rugs, chairs, couches, walls, couches, and chairs in combination.
Door.
It's not uncommon. I normally, because many of the areas where I worked were rural, to remove the clothing from the deceased and lay them out in pizza boxes, for example, if there was evidence on the clothing that was real important to me. And so that I stripped the bodies at the scene before they were transported.
Okay, and therefore, have you then taken, you said rugs, would a 10 by 10 rug be something that is inappropriate to take if you wanted to really look to see if evidence was there properly?
No?
Now, you also discussed in cross-examination your specific model, your experimental design model that you did for this specific article that you published with Mr. Vaughn.
Yes.
Okay, and what is an experimental design model?
When you conduct an experiment, you generally have a problem that you're attempting to solve. You set up a design because your results cannot exceed your design. You identify for whoever's going to be reading your paper later exactly what it is that you did. Your conclusions are normally limited to that model design so that you can't, for example, perform a shooting experiment and say that you've done it on this tabletop with a sponge on this tabletop and that these results apply to an intraoral gunshot wound. There is nothing in the experimental design that addresses intraoral gunshot wounds. So that is why you have your results. And in your discussion, you may go beyond your conclusions and imply some of personal observations. But mostly when you write a paper, you limit that to your experimental design.
So when you were discussing the fact that you were doing the paint can demonstration, you were trying to look to see how particles would go out if they had some momentum, correct?
Some additional momentum.
Some additional momentum. And the momentum in a paint can, would you agree, would probably be a lot less than the momentum from a gunshot wound?
The paint can operates on what's called a Venturi effect, and you present very small droplets under pressure. And I don't know at that point where these droplets are formed, what that pressure is.
And the experimental design model that you'd have to design would say, put some blood under pressure coming out of what would be the pounds per square inch in a gunshot wound and see how far blood would go out. That would be the design model that you'd like to do if you had your choice.
If you had the opportunity, yes.
But here you had the ability to demonstrate that even under a little bit of pressure, a little bit of momentum from a fan, blood spots or spatter, paint spatter, can go out 54 to 94 inches. I'm sorry, 63 to 94 inches.
Yes, the experiment is extremely simple. And it just shows that if you add horizontal momentum in addition to just the paint can itself, that you could carry these particulates a little farther.
Okay. And none of the articles that you cited in your article, none of the textbooks you reviewed ever discussed how far such spatter under such pressure and momentum can go out in an intraoral wound, did they?
No.
Okay. And when you talked about terminal velocity with Mr. Jackson, you talked about terminal velocity being going down,
Yes,
not across, correct?
that's correct.
Now, when you have such things as a pipeline where you're trying to push things across, and versus when you're trying to talk about terminal velocity going down, when you talk about terminal velocity going down, it's going with gravity or against gravity?
When you're talking about things going straight down, they're going with gravity.
Okay. And when you're talking about things going horizontally across like you would in a pipeline?
You're getting beyond my physics in
Okay, that's
liquid
fair.
thermodynamics sort of thing. You're dealing, Stokes' law dealt primarily with fluids and frictional capacities of viscous fluids. And so how this formula applies to pipelines and so on is he developed calculations on, if you know the viscosity densities of fluids, then you can estimate the frictional characteristics as they moved through some type of a medium. He also found that by gravity, if you have a particle like a ball bearing, you drop it in a swimming pool, that it will fall and reach terminal velocity at a certain speed. If you dropped a larger ball bearing, that it would have a terminal velocity that's faster.
In other words, if something is going with gravity, it may go out further and then come down and have your terminal velocity.
Yes.
Okay. And as we learn more about, or as you've learned more in the last 20 years about these principles, is it your conclusion that these principles, after you spoke with Mr. Jackson, still don't apply to intraoral gunshot wounds?
As time has gone by and I've, been to a lot of crime scenes and thought about the physics that's associated with this, there are other physics principles that are probably more relevant than Stokes' law to blood spatter that is created in what we call a high velocity impact environment.
Now, moving to a little bit of different area, Mr. Jackson did a demonstration with Mr. Dixon and held his shoe up about 2 inches off the ground with his heel here on a softer carpet. You've seen pictures of the carpeting at Mr. Spector's house, correct?
Yes,
And you saw that it was a pile rug?
appeared to be.
Pile rug. And that it was red?
Yes,
And what color is blood?
red.
Okay. Now, one of the things that you were discussing with Mr. Jackson is how difficult it is to see blood on blood or red on red by just peering at it, even if it's luminol.
Yes.
Now, during the lunch hour, did you put a yellow dot on this piece of paper?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And as you stand here and look at this here, can you see that yellow dot?
No.
Well, you can't take it from me.
Okay. I need to get a little closer.
You need to get a little closer?
Okay, I can see it.
Okay. And if you put this on the floor, along with a bunch of other stickies, and you can't cheat because you know where I dropped the first one, like you called Monty, can you tell from where you are where that yellow dot is?
No, I cannot see that dot.
Okay. Does the same principle apply when you're doing luminol on to look for blood spatter?
Yes.
Okay. And why is that?
Again, you're talking about a chemical reaction, and the amount of substrate that you have to react with the luminol reagent is important.
What do you mean by the amount of substrate?
The amount of metallic materials or substances within the blood stain that's going to react with the chemical to produce a light that you can visualize. If you have extremely small stains, you may not see them.
Even if they're luminescent?
Well, they may be luminescing, but they may not be of sufficient intensity that you can still see them.
And in order to scientifically, to be able to check someone's work to see if there is an absence of spatter or presence of spatter, you would want to then have that rug or that substrate and that material and look at it, correct?
Yeah, if I was concerned in this case about looking for small droplets of blood on the carpet, I'd take the carpet and look
Okay.
at it under a microscope.
Did you see any evidence in this case? By the way, did you see any pictures of the luminol reaction in this case?
No,
Did the ASCII procedures that you looked at require or indicate that photographs can be taken?
yes,
Is it possible to take photographs of luminescence?
yes.
Okay, and is it usual, or have you seen pictures where other scientists can look to make a determination whether something luminesces when other people they disagree?
I mean, through photography.
Yeah, photography. Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Before you go on, you have a little ways to go.
Yes, you do.
All right, we're going to take our, I'm sure.
And the nose, holding the gun of the decedent.
No,
Is there any scientific evidence on that right sleeve that would allow you to conclude that?
no.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Thank you, recross.
And of course, you're not saying it wasn't there either.
No.
Okay. And you do see,
Well,
well,
let's back up, careful. What is it that I wasn't seeing?
the last question, you're not saying that the right sleeve wasn't extended toward Ms. Clarkson's mouth either.
There's no evidence to support that it was there at the time.
And you're not saying that based on that, you can scientifically say that sleeve was definitely not pointed toward Ms. Clarkson. You're not saying that.
The evidence doesn't support that it was. I don't know that there might have been an intervening object, for example.
And some of
But
those intervening objects might
With
have
the
been.
presence of the spatter that is present, one would expect to see it on the leading sleeves of a person. That was the purpose of the article that I wrote.
I understand. But I guess what I'm saying is you're not telling this jury based on on the absence of certain evidence, on the absence of spatter, because you weren't there. You're not saying absolutely, definitively, scientifically, that sleeve could not have been pointed toward Ms. Clarkson.
There may be a circumstance for which we do not know that might have allowed this to happen.
And that circumstance could be intervening items, correct?
Yes.
And the intervening items might be a gun.
No, I've done enough of this with weapons that I would expect that it would travel around the weapon.
It might be a hand,
Could be,
might be a pair of hands,
could be,
or a combination of any of it.
could be.
But you definitely were aware that there was a particularized spatter pattern found on Mr. Spector's jacket, correct?
There are photographs that are taken that appear to be blood, that some have been identified by screening tests to be blood.
And if the pattern of spatter that was found at the crime scene, which is what we have to go on, is confined to the area about a 2-foot diameter from Miss Clarkson, then that jacket was within that area, correct?
If that is a limitation of the pattern, then the jacket would be within that area.
Thank you.
Thank you, redirect.
And then the sleeve would also happen to be in that area, it should be on.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, recross. All right, subject to recall, your excuse. Thank you very much for being here. You may step down. Do you have another witness?
I have secret.
Okay.
Okay, guys. He does. He uses a lot of the same intonation and everything. Like, he hasn't changed much over the years, which is why I wanted to watch this. I wanted to see if the way he presented himself and held himself and the way his tone and all that, I wanted to see if he had changed over the years, like if he got more confident, but he's just the same as he's always been, which is kind of cool, I think, anyway. Okay, so we are now going to go to Karen Reed. We're going to start with like the last, I don't know how much did we miss? Like maybe 15 minutes of testimony, if that, and then the voir dire that they did. And then we will go to live court today, and it's only going to be a half a day. So we won't miss anything. And we still probably won't go a full day, even with the little bit that we missed from yesterday adding on. So yeah, that's it. And I made a portal, so you will portal over to the other stream. So if you're not going to join us, thank you so much for coming out. I appreciate all of you. And remember, be kind to people, love your family, and Jesus loves you. And so do I. Bye, guys. I will see you in the morning or in a little bit at Karen Reed. Bye, guys.